You love creating custom Magic cards, we love thinking about them, so let's go!
First card is Learn from the Enemy by Jones. It's 3 in a blue, instant, draw a card. If it's the first spell you cast this turn, Learn from the Enemy has Storm.
Ooh. Wait, so this is... I was like, okay, Storm is always broken, right? But then this one isn't, because it's the first spell you cast this turn?
So that means you get X plus 1 draws, where X is the amount of spells your opponent did. Any opponent. If you play Commander, obviously that includes everybody. But basically the floor is draw a card, and the ceiling...
Draw a bunch of cards.
Draw your deck. I mean, if your opponent plays a lot of cards, but like draw 3 maybe is the most you can expect.
Toffel, what do you think? What's your verdict?
So I'm saying this is a 5.
I'll give it an 8.
Okay.
So why only 5?
So here's my issue, which is very common for Magic design, is that you feel the mana value it has right now is 4, is too expensive. But if you want to put it 1 down, it would be too good.
Yeah.
So now there's actually an instant speed divination in the new set, but obviously you can't print it at 3 because that would be basically better than the instant speed divinations a lot of the time, because when your opponent casts a spell, you get the divination. It's probably a bit better. But if you put it at 4, it's much worse because you also rely on your opponent to play a spell in that turn when you keep your mana up. So I don't think it's printable as that because it would be too weak. The question is, what do you add to make it reasonable? And that needs to be some line of text because the mana value doesn't add up.
But honestly, I kind of feel like for me, I gave it such a high grade because at 4, it becomes a pretty expensive divination occasionally, with also the downside that it needs to be your first spell. But it punishes like an opponent who plays more spells pretty severely, and it feels like a nice tech. Also, like you mentioned in multiplayer, where you suddenly draw so many cards when your opponent's like fought over a spell or something.
The problem is always, what do you want to design for? Is it like an exciting card that you want to play in competitive Magic, like Modern and Standard, or as a Commander card? As a Commander card, this is actually quite appealing because you can ask your opponent, maybe they want to play something more, so you get out of it. So
it's politics without printing politics onto the card. Like it's not let your opponent vote or like obvious, but it still involves politics maybe.
I think depending on what the reason is, what you want to rate, if you go for competitive, like I probably am a little more biased to that, and you go for like Commander, then we can both have a reasonable access that yours as a Commander product is a good 8, and mine for Constructed might be lower.
I like it. Good start into today's cards. So this is Joyce Knight, submitted by Guglielmo. It's a 1 red, 1/1 creature with Provoke. When Joyce Knight attacks alone, it gains indestructible end of turn and raid. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast as long as you've attacked with a creature this turn.
I will give this a 3.
Yeah, I ended up on 4. It's kind of weird that there's so okay, so this card is, the mechanics work well together. Like yes, there's raid, there's provoke, there's the indestructible. There seems to be a choice where you have to attack alone for it to properly do its thing. But let's imagine there's a world where you don't want it to attack alone anymore because you've got a 3/3 or something on the board. Then suddenly the 3/3 attacks and you still get the raid bonus. Why do I still get the cost reduction if another creature attacks? At this point, the card just feels too overpowered, but hidden behind a lot of words of text. Like it's a really good mana dork, because it doesn't produce mana once, it produces mana as often as you cast a spell that turn. Feels a bit too powerful for me, and then also has just too much text for my taste. It's weird. I can't put into words what exactly I dislike about this, but yeah, I don't like it overall. It's too much.
So I start with I like the flavor, right? The idea is clearly that some jousting is going on to provoke the creatures, and then you're apparently a very strong knight, so you have that going for you. But there's so many problems with all of the abilities combined. So I agree that the card is way too powerful. If this is your 1-drop, then you can just attack next turn. It works like a mana elf, as you said, but for all the spells.
Yeah.
Basically, but it's always a mana elf because once you attack alone, it is indestructible. It is actually indestructible and provoke is kind of too powerful because your opponent is disincentivized to cast any 1 toughness creatures ever again.
Oh yeah, this is a mana dork that also picks off your opponent's mana dork.
Yeah,
so I didn't even think about that.
So let's imagine you play the mirror right away, right? As soon as you start, it's such a feel bad because your opponent can answer with the same card.
Against any green deck, you're on the play, you play this, they can't play Llanowar Elf.
Yeah, and it's not like you can circumvent provoke. I mean, once you can tap creatures, you can tap them before they block, but when they come into play, you can't do that for a turn. I like the idea, but it feels like it's too much mashed in one card. Also, a little bit of trying too much to get it to work.
So as with every custom card video, there's 2 things to keep in mind. First up, rules text. Not everyone is an expert in Magic rules. We're not even super experts in Magic rules or how to template certain things on cards, and you shouldn't be either. So we'll interpret every card as it was meant to be designed. If there's a word missing, if there's some weird Magic grammar missing, we don't care about that. We interpret it as it was designed. Secondly, not everyone is a professional card designers. Wizards has entire teams trained to do this. We're not card designers. We only sit here and grade cards. So any criticism we offer in this video is not meant in a personal way ever. And we're all just trying to, look at cards, see what's good about them, what's bad about them. And none of us are expected to come up with perfect card designs.
No, you also can't, you can't start with it. I mean, you have to start eventually. And if you don't get feedback, you never get better.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but thank all of you for sending them in because we love seeing all of those. And if
otherwise the video wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, if we pick yours, we get like 100 submissions. It's gonna be a long video.
Our next card was submitted by Jacob McGuinness, and it's Time Stream Accelerator. Impressive name already. I have an idea already. For 2 colorless and 2 blue mana, you get a 2/3 human wizard with Ward 2 that gives all creatures cumulative upkeep 1. For those of us who might not have played with that mechanic before, for each creature, it gets a time counter at the start of your upkeep, and then you have to pay 1 mana per time counter on it, or you have to sacrifice it. So Toffel, what do you think about this one?
I'll give it a 7.
I went on 6.
Okay, so here's what I thought first. So let's be honest, it's a 7 that goes like higher instead of lower. Like I might consider
it's
an
upper
8.
7? Okay,
yeah, okay. So the problem is community upkeep is the worst.
Yeah,
like,
yes.
I understand the idea, you just really can't do it. And the problem is a lot with the mechanic is a bit feel bad, but I like the mechanic how it's used here. But also, once this creature is in play, you give cumulative upkeep 1. That means those creatures gain those H counters. When the Accelerator leaves the battlefield, the creatures keep the counters, but don't have the ability, which is very confusing for players because then do I still have to pay those? I mean, they have the counters. It's a bit of a board issue that you have to still maintain them. You can proliferate them for no reason. Like there's a lot of that. But this is mainly the only thing I dislike, but I like how it's used. I kept thinking it doesn't make any sense that it accelerates because like the cumulative upkeep is like a slowing mechanic.
Yeah.
But then I realized the creatures are not the thing that is accelerated. The time is accelerated, so the creatures feel slower in time because the time around them.
That was actually one issue I had with the card where I want a card that accelerates things. I want double mana. I want extra turns.
Yeah, but like he's like making the time around them move much faster, so the creatures are very slow.
Okay,
maybe lose time.
Maybe you can actually rephrase that and have it be the time slow downer. I don't know, a decelerator or something. But overall, I also think that cumulative upkeep is a very clunky mechanic, especially if my creatures all have different time counters on them. Oh no! I wonder if there's a better way to do this, maybe. But I do like the fact that it self-balances. Ward is very nice here because it's no hexproof, but it still requires an investment to get off the board. And also you have to pay for itself, right? Like you can't just, this doesn't stick on the board by itself. You also have to pay cumulative upkeep for itself. So it's like a delayed sweeper almost. It has interesting gameplay elements, but very tedious to track. Even in something like Arena, where you're like making strategic decisions, but your strategic decisions have to factor in how much I'm gonna have to pay for each of my creatures during the next upkeep. So very difficult to keep track. So that's where I deduct the most points.
What you could do to fix that is instead of giving every creature the counters, you just give it to the Accelerator and then say something like, in the beginning of each player's upkeep, they have to pay the amount of numbers for each creature they control.
Something like that would be very neat, because then much more clear, right? You look at the Accelerator, you've seen how far it has accelerated.
Then you can even play with the counters, like put them up or
put
down.
them up, put them down. Yeah, I like it. That's way more fun.
Xero, failed Leash by Green Monkey Sam on YouTube. Thank you. So it starts off as a 1-mana planeswalker.
It's already a questionable sign, but
from the history of the game, you know, there have never been 1-mana planeswalkers.
I'll give it the benefit of the doubt for now.
The number of loyalty counters on Xero is equal to the number of creatures you control. Sacrifice creatures whenever Xero loses loyalty. So that's kind of a state-based double-checking effect. Okay. For 0, you may pay white. If you do, create a 1/1 spirit creature token. And for 0, you may pay black. If you do, each player sacrifices a creature they control. So, what do you think?
I'll give this a 1.
Yeah, I'll give it a 3 with the asterisk of I like the idea.
Yeah, tying loyalty to something else is an interesting concept. It's just very, very difficult to execute, and I feel like if this was ever introduced, this would be part of like a grand planeswalker, right? This would be the focus piece of something, or like it would have to be impressive because it's so complicated. So right off the bat, what happens if I remove loyalty counters off of 0 with, say, some other card that removes loyalty counters? Do I have to sacrifice creatures? Probably. I would assume so. What happens if I add loyalty counters due to proliferate? Do I generate creatures out of nowhere? Do they instantly...
do I get creatures?
Yeah, do they instantly vanish again?
So what I assume there's a dependency, kind of both ways, which makes it very difficult to describe in the rules. But whatever means, it's the loyalty is always the amount of creatures. So that means you look at the amount of creatures first, and then you set the loyalty. But then the weird part is when it loses loyalty, because if it gets loyalty, you don't get creatures, but it loses, you have to sacrifice creatures, then it looks the other way. So I would just say you could clean this up by saying always the amount of loyalty is the amount of creatures.
But then why is this a planeswalker? Why don't we just make it an enchantment or something where if you lose life, you sacrifice creatures?
That would be my second, planeswalkers seems to be a little bit needy, you know? Like you have to look out for a lot of things that the planeswalkers can interact with.
Yeah.
And loyalty is a very weird interaction with rules. You cannot just make loyalty really depending on something. Maybe you can clean it up as an idea and say like, okay, it has the loyalty of your creatures when it comes into play. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you get a loyalty. Whenever you lose a loyalty, you lose a creature.
More like a soft tie to loyalty, right? Yeah. I like that a bit better. I guess the other thing that it creates here is the only once per turn clause, where you can only create a spirit once per turn or not.
I don't really, the white annoys me a little. Like, why is it all of a sudden white? I understand that you get the creature, but the main planeswalker is black. Why is it tied to white? So I would maybe look out for making it a little bit stronger, and then also adding white to the mana cost as well.
Yeah, increase the mana cost. Like, this is a complicated effect. It shouldn't be a low level of impact onto the game. It should have a high level of impact onto the game because it's a very complicated mechanic. Yeah. And then increase the mana cost accordingly, make this cost 6, 7, or 5, 6, 7, something like that. Have it have impact on the game, and clean up the rules so they're simpler. Something like add loyalty whenever a creature comes into play, and whenever it loses loyalty, you sacrifice that many creatures, or something like that. Maybe there's something to work with here, but as it stands, I don't think so.
Next card from Nightmare X5. Ayako, the Cleansing Flame, apparently one of the adaptations of the D&D character. So, there we go. 1 red-white, legendary creature, Fox Druid, 1/3. Text, instant and sorcery spells you control have lifelink. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if you don't control a creature named Natsu, create Natsu, a legendary 2/2 red elemental spirit token with whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, draw a card. Jamie?
For me, this is an 8. How about you?
I like it more. I think it is a 9 with a little asterisk, but I will say after you go.
All right, I have one kind of large gripe with this card, which is something I also dislike about some current Magic cards. Why does it create tokens with like these important effects? Like, of course, if I cast an instant or like if I cast a lightning bolt with this, I will draw a card. It would be more interesting to me if maybe the first time I create the token and then the second time I somehow draw the card. Like maybe the token gets created when I deal damage or something with an instant or sorcery. And then the first time I deal damage, I get the token. The second time I start drawing cards. That would maybe be better for me. That's my main gripe with this. Also, I would assume we're missing out on a lot of flavor here where Ayako and Natsu play with each other. I don't even know if this is like a personal D&D character or something in the actual like D&D books.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a lot of personal flavor that we don't have access to, but I feel like reading that I can already imagine what the character is like. I mean, a fox druid that has some spells with fire and life and stuff. It's already very iconic. I love the line instant and sorcery spells you control have lifelink. I wish those spells, like those keywords that you could apply to instant sorcery would be more, because it feels such an easy line, but so rewarding for people that want to try it, right?
Yeah.
There was Fire Song and
Sunspeaker, there's the lifelink Soul Mentor, Soul Spread Mentor.
Yes, they're all very terrible, but they're all beloved because people have not much access to this, and people go nuts with like, look, my lightning bolt is a lightning helix. I only needed another creature and one less mana, and all my deck is gonna be cool. It puts a lot of deck restriction like on your deck because all of a sudden you only play like burn spells or
Also
something.
in Commander, burn spells aren't that great usually because targeted removal, but this really makes you work for it and then it rewards you for it. So yeah.
But then you can play like Star of Extinction and then you all get infinite life. I agree, I don't like this whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell. I would either just put the token right away when it comes into play, you get the token and then it just dies, your problem. Or maybe you connect it to like the burn spells you do, like whenever you gain life, you make a token. If you have a token, draw a card.
Yeah, as it stands, it's also, it's so repetitive. Your opponents never get anything out of getting the token off the board. Whereas if we change it to whenever an instant or sorcery deals damage, then once they remove the token, you actually have to throw away a lightning bolt once to create the token again.
And then you can draw your cards again.
Yeah, exactly that. But apart from that, great design.
So this time we have a double-sided card by Colin O'Clock, and it's Pawn and Queen. It starts with Pawn, it costs 1 in black and is a 1/1. It has haste, for whatever reason. Pawn can only attack if the defending player controls a tapped creature. When Pawn does combat damage to an opponent, transform it, and it transforms into legendary artifact creature Queen, Vigilance. Checkmate, if the pending player is unable to block an attack from the Queen, that player loses the game, which sounds a lot like Phage.
All right, so before we go into rating this card, I would assume we're rating this as a card that is forced into the design of Pawn transforming into a Queen in an unset or something, because clearly this would never make it into a proper Magic set. So let's
You
rate
mean
it
because
like
of
that.
the names?
Yeah, they wouldn't force the concept of a pawn that transforms into a queen into a real Magic set.
No,
unless
but
it's,
you
like,
could
based on
rebrand
chat.
it with any given name. Like I think like the Pawn and Queen is just.
But the whole design is trying to create a pawn and a queen, right?
I understand. Yes.
All right, so that's rated based on that.
All right, Jamin, hit me.
Even with the constraints that we set, this is still like a 3 or 4 to me. Let's say 3. How about you?
Yeah, power level makes this really tough to rate. If we go off intention, I would be more kind, but I'll give it a 2.
So why does the pawn have haste?
All right, let us play a game. You ask me the question, I try to defend.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Why does the pawn have haste?
Because it can move 2 spaces once it moves in the beginning.
I disagree, because a pawn getting to the other side of the board. Have you played chess?
I have played it. It's very slow.
It takes like 8 turns.
But the first turn is twice, so it's kind of haste.
Okay.
Haste is irrelevant after the first turn, so that's like the pawn is irrelevant in moving after the first turn. I'm trying, I'm not saying I'm succeeding, I'm just trying.
Let's try fixing this.
Okay.
How about pawn gets a transformative counter or like some sort of counter every time it attacks, and once it has, I think it's 8 squares it needs to, 8 or 7 or something. Once it has 6, 7 or 8, I don't know chess that well.
Well, you have to have 6 moves. You start on row 2. You can move twice, so you're on road 4, and then you have to move 4 times again, so you have to 5 moves.
All right, 5 attacks,
Yes.
then it transforms, right?
Okay.
Because it moved across the board to the other side.
But the problem is it's really hard to attack with a 1/1.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really hard to force through a pawn.
Okay.
So, and then it transforms. And then I don't know how I would fix the checkmate, because for those of who haven't realized yet, but a creature that when it deals damage, you lose the game, that's no fun. Like that's...
Phage is a very loved card.
Oh, yes, but she's also 8 mana instead of 2.
There's so many problems.
Even just the scenario of I pass turn 1, you pass turn 1. I play pawn, attack, transform.
You can't attack because your
Oh,
opponent...
true.
Okay. I thought about, wow, that's pretty broken, but you have to have that clause. I still think it's pretty broken because, let's be honest, if they attack you, kill the other creature, then you have a 4/4 vigilance. Why does it have vigilance, Damon?
It can move forwards and backwards.
Yeah.
It can go back and forth. It can move all directions. It can defend while attacking. I see the flavor. I just don't think it's, like, in Magic, it's not balanced right now. I would, like, checkmate, to me, as a mechanic, if we put it on the card, it should be something that is really difficult to fabricate, right? Like, it's a board state where made up, your opponent has to control 3 tapped creatures and I have to control 2 untapped and a tapped creature,
yes.
right? That feels like a checkmate because I engineered this board state that's really complicated. So I would rewrite checkmate to something like that and the pawn into the attacking mechanic.
So let's go with an elaborated version of the card. I'm not saying it works, but this is what my mind just told me. What if you give your opponent a king token, right?
Okay.
And the king token has something like protection from non-queen things or something. Yeah. And then your goal is to transform into the queen, and then the queen can attack the king or something like this. And once the king token dies, like if the queen deals damage to the king, you win the game or something like this. Because then you tie it to the actual checkmate idea of your king loses the game.
Yeah, I like my idea better. Let us know in the comments below how you would go about fixing this card. Would you take my approach where you have to fabricate something, or would you take Toffel's approach where there's a literal queen and a literal king that somehow have to directly interact?
I mean, you can also do bishops then and rooks and stuff. Like, it's a chess themed secret lair. I don't think that's actually quite absurd. I think, mark my words, and give it 8 years or something, there will be a chess themed secret lair.
Our next card is Schrodingers Box, submitted by Aurelius2142. It's a 1-mana artifact that has Hideaway 5, so you look at the top 5 cards of your library, put 1 under the Schrodingers Box, hidden, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, put a hypothetical counter on Schrodingers Box, and you can tap to activate the Schrodingers Box only if it has 4 or more hypothetical counters on it. An opponent guesses whether the exiled card is a creature or a non-creature. If they guessed right, reveal it and add it to your hand. If not, you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So once again, I think we can agree that Schrodingers Box will not make it into the next Wilds of Eldraine. So this is obviously more of a streamlined card design for like an unset or a secret lair or something special. What do you give it?
I love the card. I think Schrodinger's concepts are always great, but I think like even it feels kind of like what it's supposed to feel like.
Yeah.
So that would be an 8 or 9 for me, but the card is just way, way, way too good. So I'm gonna settle on a 5.
I give this a 7. This is just super fun.
Okay, so I don't enjoy Hideaway on that card because it kind of attaches to a cycle of Hideaways, because Hideaway was always a cycle and it kind of needs something to work out why it's Hideaway. You can just exile 1 of the top 5 cards. It's fine, like it doesn't need Hideaway. So let's say you cast it turn 1 because it costs 1 mana. Then on your 5th turn, it got the 4th counter, imagining you do not do anything with the counters. Then you can tap it and draw. The worst case is you draw a card, right? Which is bad, but usually not the worst, especially because it's also a 1-mana artifact. If you want to play it in like Modern, for example, it could count towards something that you have a 1-mana artifact, especially considering you can sacrifice it.
1-mana artifacts in general are used throughout Modern, right?
Right. And then when you miss, you draw the card, but when you hit, you get to play it for free, which is a little bit complicated because you have to kind of build your deck. Let's say your opponent knows your deck because you're in a tournament situation. Then if you only play big creatures, well, the biggest creature. Right. So, but if you play like, I don't know, Omniscience and Emrakul, they're gonna have a hard time because, let's be honest, it's probably a coin flip, depending on what you know about the game. But this is kind of like difficult that they get the chance of 50% to cast the very big card that ends the game for just 1 mana and a few turns.
All right, let me address those issues just by adding more flavor to the card. Schrödinger also doesn't know whether the cat is alive or not. So I also shouldn't know whether it's a creature or a non-creature below there. So the card selected should be somewhat random. It can't be entirely random because then you'll just hit lands usually. But I feel like...
Why can't your cat be a land?
Yeah, maybe it could be, yeah. So let's just make the card random instead of hideaway. Like just exile the top card of your library. Or let's not make it top, that's easily manipulated. Like bottom, or you shuffle your library or something.
No, it's fine. You can manipulate the top card. Why not?
So exile the top card. You don't know what it is. Your opponent doesn't know what it is.
Yeah, it could be anything.
It could be anything. And that way you also disincentivize competitive players from using it too much because it's very random. It could easily go wrong. Right. And you even added more flavor.
I agree. I love it.
Perfect. Yeah. What a great card design. I like this a lot.
Next card is Awaited Arrival. It costs 1 white and is an enchantment from Gabriel Moraes 6871. Thank you. It says, as Awaited Arrival enters the battlefield, name a creature card or a planeswalker card. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a weight counter on Awaited Arrival. Spells with the chosen name cost 1 less to cast for each weight counter on Awaited Arrival. And when you cast a spell with the chosen name, sacrifice Awaited Arrival and draw a card. Jamon? Wait for it. Okay. We waited. You got a waiting counter. Go ahead. Aren't you excited? in your upkeep, it's like, wait, I'll put a counter.
Wait, I'm waiting. I give this a 9 because
agreed.
It's an awesome concept. The only thing that's missing for me is some more payoff. Maybe I can gain some life when I cast the awaited creature, because as it stands, this just replaces itself and makes mana, which feels weird a bit. Like, maybe we could work on the payoff a bit more. Maybe that it's not just draw a card, but maybe I gain a token and gain some life instead of drawing a card. Like, maybe we can tweak the payoff. Everything else I love very much because it feels like an interesting mechanic. I clearly communicate what I'm about to do. I get a payoff for doing it. I feel good when doing the thing that I'm supposed to do. It all comes together nicely. I wonder if I missed anything in the gameplay patterns where that becomes unfun, but to me it just looks like a great design.
So I agree that as it stands, it's kind of too bad. So I would suggest just make a 1 white mana. Remove the 2 mana, go to 1.
I actually wanted to say that I like the 2 mana because 1 mana, it is very obvious, okay, well, this is your perfect 1-drop, right? This is what you want to play in turn 1. And 2 mana make it more painful, and thus it feels like more of an investment.
Right, but you also don't get much out of it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
Like if you want to keep it at, that's the other way. I've thought a little bit about the payoff, but I couldn't find anything that seems reasonable. The problem is also it already has 4 lines of text, so a pay 1 adds more lines of text, and I think the cleanest way is just reduce it to 1 mana, because also maybe story-wise, let's say you have a Teferi, right? And story-wise, he's somewhere else and then he needs to rescue the world and everybody's waiting or whatever. That could be your punchline card of the set and you want that to be good.
Then again, I really don't want to play against turn 1 this and to turn to Teferi out of blue-white control.
Why not? It's not different than a Noble Hierarch that does this. Right?
You're right, I guess.
And, I mean, you're naming literally the card you want to play, so maybe your opponent can force spike it or whatever. Like, it's not like they're surprised by what's going to happen. And if you, I don't know, if you play a spell 1 white, your next spell costs 1 less, draw a card, would you play that, like, next turn? Like, it's pretty good, but it's also not outstandingly good.
Anyways, really nice design. We like it. Our next card was submitted by Caleb Price, and it's called Graveyard Gargoyle. It's an artifact that costs 1 black mana. It enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. For 1 colorless mana, it lets you exile target permanent card from a graveyard, putting a +1/+1 counter, a menace counter, or a death touch counter on Graveyard Gargoyle. Remove a counter from Graveyard Gargoyle. Graveyard Gargoyle becomes a 0/0 construct creature token until end of turn. So Toffel, what's your grade?
I'll give it an 8.
I went with 7. We're surprisingly close all day.
It's too aligned.
Yeah.
We need more fighting.
But I feel like with this one, it's fairly straightforward.
Yes, I have suggestions. First, make it colorless. I don't know why it should be black.
Well, I mean, Graveyard Black.
Yeah, but white also has that. Green could also have that. Like, I understand the black. It's because of menace and death touch counter. I can see it, but I don't know. Usually in a set, you want to have things access to artifact removal that is for every deck. And if this is the one of your choice for this set, you want to make it colorless. I think the raid is a little bit too good.
Yeah,
I would add it to just 2 colorless mana.
Yeah.
But the rest is kind of cool. I mean, you're charging it up. It's not very good in the beginning because there are not many permanents in the graveyard. But it's when you draw it late, it can grow quite quickly. If you draw it early, it could prevent your opponent from doing shenanigans. Maybe you have some combos, like you can remove fetch lands or cheap creatures or stuff. I like very much that it's something that prevents you from losing when your opponent wants to use the graveyard, but also keeps you a form of winning because it gets a creature, like we know from the
Graveyard Hearse, or unlicensed Hearse.
We know from the unlicensed Hearse or the Lion Sash, they have combined this mechanics with something that is also affecting the gameplay very much, and I love that this translated into.
Yeah, I mean, this is very easily comparable to Unlicensed Hearse, and I feel like this also gives us an idea of why the rate might be too cheap, because with Unlicensed Hearse you can remove 2 cards maximum per turn.
Any card.
Whereas with this one you can remove a bunch of cards in one turn, making it huge. So yeah, the rate might be too cheap here, but that's why we gave it 7 or 8 points instead of the full 10. Our final card of the day comes from Dismass the Penitent, and it's Tungarth's Last Stand. 2 red-green, it's a legendary sorcery. Small reminder, you can only cast a legendary sorcery if you control a legendary creature. And until end of turn, target legendary creature you control gets +4/+4 and gains whenever a creature dealt damage by this creature this turn dies, this creature fights target creature you don't control. Then that creature fights target creature you don't control. Toffel, how do you feel about this?
I love it.
Yes, same.
I have a small remark, so I'm gonna give it 9.5 points.
Yeah, okay, 9.5, we can agree to that. Yeah, it's as close to 10 as you can get.
I love it. Okay, I don't know if you know who Tungarth is or what his story is.
I just assumed it's like Sorak or something.
No, it was a Minotaur from the Weatherlight crew. A mono-red character, very, very beloved because he was very impulsive and very strong. And all of this makes so much sense because you give the creature whatever it needs, like +4/+4, and then you just fight everything. I think Tungarth even died in the story, protecting the
that's
Weatherlight.
Even more flavorful.
Yes. So I love the card. I think 2 things need to change. Unfortunately, it's green. I don't want it to be green. I understand why it's green because it needs to fight.
Yeah.
I think you can put that just in red, and it's totally okay because red also has fighting as a mechanic. I think green is not needed. But I want more power and I want more toughness. I think if you have a legendary sorcery, you need to make it cool, you need to make it last. You also target a creature, already problematic. Just give it +6/+6, you know? Something amazingly awesome.
Yeah, maybe even more. Like, I don't know if you could get away with +10/+10 because that's like a breaking point where it becomes awesome. But maybe in multiplayer games, +10/+10 might be okay.
Yeah, definitely.
It does. In single player games, +10/+10 might actually lead to a scenario where it survives, which you really don't want to happen.
I think the problem more with +10/+10 is like, yes. The problem is definitely when it survives, it also killed everything else. So it's kind of
strong. And then it gets to attack for like.
But also, then your opponent needs to be very wary of never tapping out when you have a legendary, which is too frightening.
Yeah.
If they tap 4 mana and deal 6 more, maybe even 7 more, you say, well done. You know, you can get that from other cards as well. But I think 8 to 10 is already a little bit dicey.
Maybe something between 5 and 10 is the sweet spot. I agree with your point that it should pump. I also love that it pumps for a flat amount rather than like per creature on the battlefield. No, it's just like this hyper transition.
Yeah, the Hulk. or you give like a potion or whatever it is.
I also love the fact that like it obviously dies, but it doesn't say it dies on the card. Like the card doesn't destroy it, but yes, if it fights everything on the board, it will hopefully not make it. My main gripe, I actually think it should be green, because green and red in combination, this card feels super green and red to me. My main gripe is the wording right now is very messy. Like whenever a creature, it fights, and then it dies, and then it fights again. Like this feels very messy for me to understand. Of course, I get what's going on, but maybe that could be simplified somehow, but I'm not sure how. But that's the only gripe I have with it. Otherwise, it's so flavorful. Like you bulk up and then you go and you fight everyone because you're so mad.
The original also has the actual fighting. You could tap the original to fight something. So that's also cool that it connected to this card.
It's so fun. Very fun card. Love it.
Well done.
That does it for today's cards. If you want to be notified when we do something like this again to maybe submit your card designs, please do subscribe. It helps us grow the channel and so on, and you'll get notified in the community tab when we gather new submissions for a video like this. Also, do you disagree with anything or have more feedback? Please let us know in the comments below. It's the only way we can know what you enjoy at home and what you don't enjoy, and we promise we read those comments.
And once you're done with that, we'll see you in the next video.